In the sleepy town of Elmswood, there was a peculiar character named Larry. Larry had a knack for collecting forgotten things. His house, a once charming Victorian, now groaned under the weight of his collection. Each room held a new surprise: a wall of dusty typewriters, shelves of chipped china dolls, and a garden of rusting bicycles. Larry's neighbors knew him as that odd guy who never threw anything away. They'd wave as he pedaled his ancient bike through the streets, a trail of dust and creaking metal echoing his path. One evening, Larry stumbled upon something that piqued his interest more than usual: an abandoned movie theater. The Elmswood Grand had stood tall for nearly a century, but the last reel of film had rolled out decades ago. The theater looked as if it had been frozen in time. The marquee's paint peeled away like sunburnt skin, and the windows were as dark as a moonless night. Larry's eyes lit up at the prospect of what treasures lay within. He approached the heavy, metal door and gave it a gentle nudge. It squealed in protest but eventually swung open, revealing a vast lobby that smelled of stale popcorn and mildew. The floor was sticky with forgotten soda, and the walls were adorned with faded posters of movies long forgotten. Larry stepped in, his heart racing with excitement. The silence was thick, almost tangible, as if the theater had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to come and wake it from its slumber. As he ventured deeper into the theater, the air grew colder, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. The grandiose staircase leading to the balcony looked like a gateway to another world. Larry couldn't resist the allure of the unknown, so he began to ascend the steps, one by one. His footsteps echoed through the emptiness, each one sounding louder than the last. When he reached the top, he saw that the red velvet curtains, torn and tattered, had been drawn back to reveal the cavernous space beyond. The theater seats, once a sea of plush velvet, were now a desert of decay. The screen was a massive, black rectangle, the size of a small house, and it loomed over Larry like a silent sentinel. He felt a strange pull towards it, an urge to peer into the abyss. As he approached the stage, a sudden gust of cold wind exhaled from the mouth of the theater, sending a shiver down his spine. It was as if the building itself was alive and watching him. The dusty velvet of the curtains began to rustle, and the lights flickered to life, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. The projector room was a cobweb-covered chamber of forgotten technology. Larry felt a mix of excitement and dread as he approached the ancient machine. The room was cluttered with film reels, their labels long since faded. He reached out to touch one, and as his fingertips grazed the cool metal, the projector sputtered to life. The screen flickered with the image of an old, black-and-white movie, the film crackling and popping as it played. Larry squinted to make out the faded title, The Nightfall of Elmswood. The theater seemed to breathe in anticipation, the air thick with a sense of foreboding that even Larry couldn't ignore. He watched the film, mesmerized by the grainy images of a town eerily similar to his own, yet haunted by a shadowy presence. The film was about a dark spirit that had been summoned to the Elmswood Grand during its opening night. The spirit grew stronger with each scream of terror, feeding on the fear of the audience. The more Larry watched, the more he realized that the theater had not been abandoned out of neglect, but out of fear. The movie played out its macabre tale, the images on the screen growing clearer as the story grew darker. Larry felt the temperature plummet and the shadows thicken around him. He knew he should leave, but he was drawn in by the story unfolding before his eyes. The film reached its climax, the spirit's power reaching a crescendo, and then the screen went blank. The room grew quiet, the only sound the rhythmic tick of the cooling projector. Larry's heart hammered in his chest as he slowly turned to leave the room. The door creaked open, and he stepped out into the balcony. The theater was plunged into darkness once more, the cold air now thick with an unmistakable sense of malevolence. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. But the darkness grew heavier with each passing second. The theatre had come alive with the telling of its grim history, and now it seemed to be watching him, waiting for its next performance. He descended the stairs, his eyes darting around the lobby. The posters on the wall fluttered in the breeze, and he swore he heard whispers echoing through the corridors. His hand tightly gripped the railing, the stickiness of the decaying theatre clinging to his palm. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices from a bygone era, all urging him to stay, to watch. He stumbled, almost falling down the last few steps, and broke into a run towards the exit. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind him, cutting off the whispers and leaving him in the quiet embrace of the night. Larry leaned against the door, panting and trembling. He knew he had to tell someone about what he'd seen, but who would believe him? The townsfolk already thought he was eccentric. This would only cement their suspicion. He climbed onto his bike and pedaled away from the Elmswood Grand, the theatre's ominous presence shrinking in his rearview mirror. For days, Larry couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. The whispers from the theatre haunted his dreams, and every shadow felt like the dark spirit from the film. He avoided telling anyone about his experience, fearing ridicule or worse, being seen as the town's new source of entertainment. Yet, the pull of the Elmswood Grand remained, gnawing at the edges of his consciousness. It was as if the theatre had marked him, claiming him as part of its next act. One night, unable to resist, Larry found himself standing before the theatre's entrance again. The marquee was unchanged, but the windows were now illuminated from within by a flickering, ghostly light. He could hear faint laughter and the occasional scream, echoes from the past, trapped in a never-ending loop. He pushed the door open, and the smell of stale popcorn washed over him. The theatre was alive once more, and this time it felt hungry. The lobby was now a twisted carnival of his fears. The posters had morphed into twisted faces, the floor sticky with something other than forgotten soda. The whispers grew louder, the air colder. The screen beckoned him with an image of himself, lost in the labyrinth of seats below. Larry's heart raced as he realized the theatre had woven him into its dark narrative. He took a tentative step towards the auditorium, the laughter from the screen growing more manic, the shadows stretching out to greet him. The projector hummed in anticipation, the film reel spinning with a life of its own. Larry knew he had to break the cycle, to face the spirit that haunted the Elmswood Grand and free himself from its grasp. He stepped into the theatre, the lights dimming as he descended into the abyss. The screen grew larger with each step, the whispers swirling around him like a tornado of voices. As he reached the front row, the film changed. The image of Larry was replaced by a crowd of townsfolk, all with their eyes on him, their faces contorted into masks of horror. The spirit had found a new audience and was ready to feed. Larry's hand shook as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, battery-operated lamp he had brought with him. He flicked it on, casting a feeble beam into the darkness. The whispers grew silent, and the shadows retreated into the corners. Larry took a deep breath and shone the light on the screen, the brightness piercing the gloom. The spirit, caught in the light, began to dissipate. The image of the townspeople grew fainter, until it was just Larry standing alone in the spotlight. He knew what he had to do. He had to replace the fear with something else, something that would banish the spirit for good. With trembling hands, Larry switched off the lamp. The theatre was once again plunged into darkness, and the spirit's whispers grew stronger. But instead of running, Larry began to sing. It was a lullaby his mother had sung to him as a child, a tune of comfort and protection. The whispers grew softer, and the cold air began to warm. The screen flickered, the spirit's power waning with each note. The theatre, once a bastion of dread, slowly transformed around Larry. The shadows retreated, and the air grew less oppressive as his voice filled the cavernous space. The flickering lights steadied, their glow warm and inviting. The spirit, weakened by the sweet melody, began to coalesce into a small, shivering form on the stage. It was no longer a monstrous spectre but a lost soul, trapped by its own hunger for fear. Larry stepped closer, the beam of his flashlight playing over the spirit's ethereal form. It was a woman, dressed in tattered finery from another age, her eyes filled with a deep, endless sadness. She looked up at him, and for a moment, their gazes locked. The film reel above them grew still, the projection of terror halting mid-frame. Larry saw the fear and pain in her eyes, and his heart went out to her. He knew then that she was not an evil force, but a tormented soul seeking solace. He approached the stage, the remnants of the velvet curtains parting like a path before him. The spirit looked up at him, her translucent hands reaching out, pleading. Larry took her hand, feeling the coldness of her touch seep into his skin. He began to sing louder, the lullaby resonating through every corner of the Elmswood Grand. The whispers grew fainter until they were nothing more than a faint memory, and the woman's form grew more solid. Her eyes searched his, looking for understanding, for salvation. Larry offered her his warmth, his voice a gentle embrace that seemed to mend the fissures in her soul. The theatre itself began to change, the decay peeling away to reveal the grandeur of days long past. The seats, once a barren wasteland of decay, now shone with fresh velvet, and the air was no longer stale, but perfumed with the scent of new beginnings. The spirit leaned into Larry, her shivering subsiding as the warmth of his touch reached her core. The screen behind them flickered back to life, but instead of horror, it projected images of joy and laughter, of happy endings and bright futures. The townspeople of Elmswood danced and played, their faces alight with smiles. The dark spirit was gone, replaced by a gentle light that filled the theatre. Larry realized that by facing his fears and offering comfort, he had not only saved himself, but also the lost soul of the Elmswood Grand. He led her out of the theatre and into the night, the town's whispers of terror replaced by a quiet, peaceful calm. The moon shone down on them as Larry pedaled his bike through the deserted streets, the ghostly figure of the woman holding on to the back, her laughter a soft melody on the wind. As they reached the town's edge, she turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Then, with a final smile, she vanished into the night, leaving Larry standing alone, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The theatre remained open, but the town's fear had lifted. The Elmswood Grand became a place of joy and wonder once more, where children laughed and couples held hands, sharing in the magic of the silver screen. Larry continued his life as the eccentric collector, but now he had a newfound purpose. He knew that sometimes the most terrifying places held the most profound secrets, and it was up to those brave enough to look beyond the shadows to set the lost souls free. And every night, as the final credits rolled and the lights came up, Larry felt a gentle warmth in his heart, a reminder of the ghostly lullaby that had changed both his life and the town's destiny.